Milo Shepard didn't expect a fight when he returned to his family's old property in Crescent Grove. It was just a garage. A large, well-built, standalone garage that his grandfather had poured concrete for in the 1970s, just far enough from the house to keep the noise of his carpentry from waking up the rest of the family. Milo had inherited the place a few years earlier and had finally decided to restore it as a workspace. He wasn't living in the main house yet, but the garage, solid, detached, and out of sight from the street, was his project. A retreat. A promise to himself that he wouldn't let the last piece of his grandfather's legacy rot away. The problem was, the garage sat just outside the official lines of the HOA map. And that put it in the crosshairs of Karen Mason. Karen Mason had been president of the Crescent Grove HOA for 6 years. She was sharp, politically connected, and ruthlessly confident. To many, she seemed like the archetype of suburban order. But Milo saw something different, an obsessive need for control, wrapped in the language of community development. The first time she showed up on his property, clipboard in hand, she didn't ask permission to walk past the gate. She simply let herself in, walked up the gravel path, and demanded the key to the outbuilding. Milo had blinked, unsure if she was serious. "This structure is within Crescent Grove's community improvement zone," she declared, tapping her folder. "We're coordinating a pipeline project, and will need to repurpose the building as a temporary staging site. Please provide access, or you'll be fined." "It's not part of the HOA," Milo said, already irritated. "It's on privately deeded land." Karen smiled in a way that wasn't really a smile. "That's not how we see it." He thought that was the end of it. A misunderstanding. Maybe a boundary survey mix-up or a clerical error. But the letters started coming. Threats of fines. Demands for entry. Accusations of non-compliance with HOA guidelines. Milo took them to his attorney, Leslie Cooper, who confirmed what he already knew. The garage wasn't in their jurisdiction. Full stop. That should have ended it. But Karen wasn't the kind to back down when someone said no. Especially not someone who wasn't afraid of her title. Within a week, HOA board members began walking by his fence at all hours. Code enforcement officers, summoned by the HOA, drove past slowly. A landscaping crew arrived one day and stood at the edge of his property, looking around like they were casing a building. One night, someone turned off his exterior lights. He found his security camera wires clipped. That was when Milo stopped reacting and started preparing. He didn't tell anyone, not even Leslie, what he planned to do. He spent 2 weeks upgrading his property, installing high-resolution, cloud-linked cameras, some visible, others hidden. He built pressure alarms into the gravel path, added reinforced locks. He mounted a steel sign that read, "Private property. Not HOA. Not negotiable." It wasn't subtle, but it wasn't meant to be. Then came the break-in attempt. It was just after 3 a.m. when Milo's phone pinged. Motion detected. He sat upright in bed, pulled up the camera feed, and watched in real time as 3 individuals in dark clothing approached the garage. One carried bolt cutters. Another had what looked like a crowbar. And standing behind them, directing them with sharp, hurried whispers, was Karen Mason. They tried the doors first, then the windows. One of them pried at the hinges, while another used a small shovel to start digging near the foundation, looking for a pipe or a cable. They weren't just trespassing. They were excavating. Karen supervised like a general. And they didn't know that 3 feet away, beneath the mulch by the porch, a hidden camera recorded everything, her face illuminated by the moon, clear and unmistakable. When the police arrived later that morning, Karen was gone. But she'd left a note, an actual printed letter on HOA letterhead, slipped under the garage door. It warned that continued defiance would result in escalated action, referencing a pending reassignment of property use. Under HOA Ordinance 9.3b, which, Leslie later confirmed, didn't even exist, the footage was damning. Within 24 hours, Leslie filed for a protective order and launched a civil suit on Milo's behalf. $2.5 million in damages, including criminal trespass, destruction of property, conspiracy to defraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Leslie didn't just file it in the local county court. She filed federally, citing civil rights violations and abuse of process under color of authority. The story hit the news within days. HOA president accused of midnight vandalism, read one headline. Man installs hidden cameras, catches break-in by HOA board, said another. National media picked it up. Milo appeared via Zoom on morning shows and legal commentary programs. Viewers were stunned. The footage, edited by Leslie's media-savvy intern, went viral. Karen's face, clearly visible as she ordered workers to dig and pry at the foundation, looped endlessly across social media. Memes followed. Karen claimed the video was doctored. Her lawyers tried to argue that the garage had been abandoned. They accused Milo of being hostile to progress. But nothing stuck. The trial took months. Karen's supporters dwindled. The HOA board started to fracture. One member resigned. Another flipped, offering sworn testimony in exchange for immunity. He confirmed everything. Karen's obsession with the garage, her belief that she could forge jurisdiction with paperwork, and her explicit instructions to avoid involving law enforcement. Leslie's courtroom performance was surgical. She played the video frame by frame, presented certified property surveys, called zoning officials, who confirmed no legal project existed. Her closing argument painted a clear picture, a man defending his right to keep what was his, against a group of bullies using fake authority to take it away. The jury returned a verdict in less than 4 hours. Milo won the full $2.5 million in damages. The judge added a scathing referral for criminal charges against Karen Mason, citing deliberate and coordinated illegal action under the guise of civic authority. Karen was indicted on 3 felony counts. She was booked the same week, but the story wasn't over yet. The verdict didn't just shake the courtroom, it reverberated through the entire town. In Crescent Grove, a neighborhood once defined by manicured hedges, beige conformity, and passive silence, a wall of fear collapsed the moment Karen Mason was found guilty. Milo's courtroom win wasn't just personal. It was seismic. By the time the evening news aired that night, neighbors were gathering in driveways. Not in celebration, yet, but in cautious conversation. For years, many had grumbled behind closed doors about the HOA's strict fines, aggressive warnings, and Karen's increasingly authoritarian grip on what was once supposed to be a community-led board. But few dared speak up. That changed in an instant. Milo stayed mostly quiet in the immediate aftermath. The cameras came calling, news vans, podcasters, even a few documentarians, but he declined most interviews. He didn't care to be famous. What mattered to him had already happened. The truth had been aired, the lie exposed, and the woman who tried to steal his property had been brought to justice. The HOA, on the other hand, imploded publicly and swiftly. At first, there were press releases, dry, deflecting statements from the board that claimed Karen acted without formal consensus and may have misunderstood her scope of authority. But leaked emails, obtained legally through discovery during Milo's lawsuit, showed otherwise. Karen wasn't acting alone. Several board members had greenlit her behavior. Some had drafted the fraudulent letters. A few had even signed off on the fake ordinance, 9.3b, knowing it didn't exist in the HOA's charter. The press had a field day. One member fled the state. 2 more resigned within days. The HOA's legal defense fund dried up. Then came the financial losses. The court-ordered damages hit Crescent Grove like a bombshell. With no HOA insurance willing to cover such an egregious act of intentional criminal misconduct, the board was liable for paying from its own coffers. That meant special assessments, massive ones. Suddenly, the very residents Karen had claimed to protect were being asked to foot the bill for her personal vendetta. People were furious. Homeowners started digging. Complaints that had once been ignored or buried were dusted off and submitted to state investigators. One elderly resident came forward with proof that she had been fined thousands over 4 years for a non-compliant mailbox and weeds growing 3 inches too tall, both accusations that now appeared wholly arbitrary. A young couple shared how Karen had blocked their renovation permit and threatened them with legal action for placing solar panels in a prohibited visibility zone. Every story added weight to a growing public perception. Karen Mason had been running a private kingdom under the banner of community leadership. As her criminal trial approached, Karen vanished from public view. Her once regular HOA update email stopped. Her home, which sat near the edge of Crescent Grove, was suddenly quiet. A for sale sign appeared, only to be taken down weeks later. Rumors swirled. A private investigator snapped photos of Karen being escorted into a federal building in handcuffs for her initial arraignment on zoning fraud, document forgery, and conspiracy charges. Milo watched from a distance. What had begun as a fight over a garage had turned into a mirror held up to an entire system. The court hadn't restored the peace overnight, but it gave others permission to stop shrinking in fear of 3 letters, HOA. It shifted the balance. Media coverage never fully stopped. Milo's security footage, the now iconic clip of Karen barking orders in the moonlight, continued to circulate online, appearing in think pieces, news specials, and even university lectures on property law and homeowners' rights. The term, GarageGate, trended briefly on Twitter. More than a few politicians referenced it during local and state campaign stops, arguing for new laws to place stronger checks on HOA powers. A year after the trial, Milo hosted a gathering on his property. Not a party, not quite, but a marker. A sign that something had ended, and something else had begun. He called it the Garage Freedom Festival, half in jest. But the turnout surprised him. Over 150 people came, many from Crescent Grove, others from neighborhoods miles away. Some brought homemade signs. Others brought folding chairs and stories. One man drove from out of state, just to shake Milo's hand. He had once lost his own fight against a corrupt HOA, and though he didn't win like Milo had, he said seeing someone else take it all the way to justice helped close something in his heart. The garage itself had been restored, cleaned, repainted, and reinforced. But Milo had added a plaque beside the door. Not flashy, not bitter. Just words carved into wood. This property stood. And so did I. That afternoon, as music played and neighbors shared grilled food, Milo stood on the makeshift stage, a flatbed trailer lent by a local farmer, and spoke into a cheap mic. I never wanted to fight, he said. But I learned that sometimes peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the result of standing your ground until the fight ends. People clapped. Some cheered. A few cried. When Karen Mason was finally sentenced, 6 months later, the courtroom was less crowded than Milo's had been. No one from the current HOA board attended. The judge, known for her no-nonsense approach, called Karen's actions a flagrant abuse of community trust and a gross perversion of the authority entrusted to her. Karen received a 3-year prison sentence, suspended after 18 months, with restitution and community service mandated. She was banned from holding any future leadership position in any residential organization, anywhere in the state. For Milo, it was enough. He didn't want vengeance. He wanted closure. And he had in the months that followed Karen Mason's sentencing, Milo found himself drawn into a world he never expected to be part of, legislative reform. It started small, just a few phone calls from state representatives curious to hear what really happened in Crescent Grove. A few months later, Milo was invited to attend a homeowners' rights summit in Madison. He sat on a panel beside lawyers, civic leaders, and a retired judge. They called him a civil liberties advocate. He chuckled at the title but understood the weight behind it. His story had grown far beyond one neighborhood dispute. He had become proof that resistance to overreach could succeed, that everyday people could push back and win. And more than that, his case had exposed cracks in a system that had long operated in the shadows of local governance. For decades, HOAs had enjoyed a veil of authority with little state-level oversight. In theory, they were meant to preserve property values, maintain aesthetics, and resolve disputes. In practice, many had evolved into hyper-regulated fiefdoms run by unchecked individuals. Milo's trial, especially the viral security footage and courtroom victory, had pulled back that veil in the most public way possible. He began receiving emails from people around the country. A man in Arizona who was fined $10,000 for keeping bees. A woman in Florida forced to paint over a mural on her fence. A retired veteran in Texas whose HOA tried to evict him for building a wheelchair ramp without Prior design approval. They weren't asking Milo to solve their problems. They were just sharing. Thanking him. Letting him know that his fight had rippled outward and reminded them they weren't alone. Milo didn't seek the spotlight. After the Garage Freedom Festival, he went back to his life. He reopened his grandfather's garage workshop, turned it into a creative space again. Some days, he worked on woodworking projects. Other days he wrote. His attorney, Leslie Cooper, had encouraged him to document the entire experience. He wasn't sure what it would become, maybe a book, maybe just something for the archives. But he knew the story wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told. You can't fight City Hall. And yet, Milo didn't style himself a hero. When people asked him what it felt like to take down the HOA, he always corrected them. I didn't take it down, he said. They did that to themselves. I just refused to move. The new leadership at Crescent Grove looked very different. A rotating committee of residents now ran it, not an HOA, but a neighborhood council. Their charter was 1 page long. No fines. No mandatory dues. No enforcement powers beyond what the city already handled. It was more potlucks than policies. More cooperation than control. When Milo attended his first meeting, held in the same clubhouse where Karen had once ruled with iron precision, he sat in the back, quietly listening. A young couple presented plans to build a community greenhouse. An elderly resident suggested installing a bench along the dog path. Nobody took minutes. Nobody barked rules. People just talked. Afterward, someone approached Milo, an older woman, maybe in her 70s, with wispy gray hair and eyes that had seen decades of neighborhood drama. She said she'd lived through 4 HOA boards and had watched each one become more rigid than the last. You didn't just fix the garage, she said, resting a hand on his shoulder. You fixed the street. He didn't know what to say. So he just nodded. Years later, long after the news cycle moved on, Milo's case continued to appear in law school casebooks and civil rights seminars. His name became shorthand in property law discussions. The Shepherd precedent. Some called it a reference to the ruling that strengthened limits on HOA powers in the state and inspired similar legislation elsewhere. Milo never sought credit. But he kept the plaque on his garage wall. And he left the hidden camera exactly where it was. Not because he expected another attack, but as a reminder that vigilance and peace could, and must, exist side by side. One fall morning, he stood in front of his house, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise through the red and gold trees. The yard was quiet. The fence was still. The workshop behind him, once the center of a legal war, now smelled of cedar and varnish. A car passed slowly on the street. The driver waved. Milo raised his hand in return. He wasn't just a man with a garage anymore. He was the man who'd stood still when the system tried to knock him down. And for every person watching from their own homes, wondering if it was worth fighting back, his answer, quiet and steady, had already echoed across the country. It was worth it. Because home isn't just a place. It's a right. And sometimes, the strongest walls aren't built with brick, but with resolve.